I keep losing and regaining my equilibrium, which is the basic plot of all popular fiction. And I myself am a work of fiction. Kurt Vonnegut, from Wampeters, Foma, and Grand Balloons, 1974. I'm Alan Loibner-Waitkus, and this is American Lit 1865 through present, and this marks a really sad occasion. This is the last of Vonnegut's novels, and the last one I will be teaching, and I'll explain that more in a second on that. I'm so obsessed with Kurt Vonnegut that I actually have a doll I'll show you in my office of him. I'm a grown man with a doll in my office of the author. But let me go over the point of this video. This is not a definitive biography on Kurt Vonnegut. It's really to prepare you for Timequake, to give you just enough information to get through that. And I want to start by talking about me, what and why we read Timequake, and the importance here and all that. When I was in college, I knew who Vonnegut was from my sophomore year in high school, and I'll discuss that a little more later, but I had not read anything until my sophomore year in college. I read Harrison Bergeron, which is a very famous short story, and I'm more of a novels person, so I went out and bought every novel that he had written to that point, which was 12. He had not yet written the one we read, which is, of course, Timequake. He'd written up through Hocus Pocus, and I read them all and, became this sort of huge Vonnegut fan. And a few years ago, now you have to remember, when you're an English teacher, you teach the same pieces over and over again. I will teach barn burning until the day that I die. And the novel for this class was Kate Chopin's The Awakening, which I'm not a huge fan of. It's a great novel, but it was just getting kind of old. And so I switched to the other one that they would let us, which was The Old Man and the Sea, and that got old pretty quickly. And so I approached my department chair and said, can I do a Vonnegut, a novel? And he said, absolutely, Vonnegut's well respected now. And so I decided that every semester I would do Vonnegut's novels, a new Vonnegut novel in order that they were written. And so again, that's why this is a sad situation. This ends, you will be the last class to be taught a Vonnegut novel by me, unless I go back and do some of them again. But now, again, we're on his 13th and last novel. This video, I'm going to talk about Kurt Vonnegut and some other, issues that I think you need to know before you read Timequake. It's mixed in. Sometimes the pictures in the background will be about what I'm talking about, or the images. Sometimes it's just a mixture of pictures of him and quotes. There is no order to these. I just pulled some images and pulled some quotes to kind of give visuals while I talk over this. Let me pull up some notes here. Kurt Vonnegut was born November 11th, 1922 in Indianapolis, Indiana. And that's a big thing that comes back and forth in his books. He says of a fake city, Midland City, Ohio, which is really his version of Indianapolis. But he mentions that a lot in this book, how much he enjoyed growing up in Indianapolis, and one of his common themes is this extended family idea. Again, his family of free thinkers. Vonnegut was a humanist, which he explains a little bit in this book, meaning atheist, agnostic. He just really kind of meant we as human beings needed to be kind to each other, which is actually a relatively common religious belief. And notice how he doesn't again try to preach to you about why you shouldn't be Christian or Jewish or any other religion. In fact, he has positive things to say. And one of his famous quotes is always that if Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount didn't exist, he wouldn't want to be alive. He grew up again in Indianapolis. His family was rich, and then the Great Depression came, and they weren't rich, which ultimately led years later to his mother's suicide. He equates that his older sister and brother both were sent to private schools, but he had to transfer to a public school, being the youngest, for the remainder of his education, and has a lot of positive things to say about public schools. The war, World War II, broke out, and he did what he was failing out of Cornell. He was a chemistry major because his brother, who was a meteorology person, a scientist, and his father pushed him in that direction. We went to Cornell, and he, realized he wasn't that interested in it. Now, the science background we see in a lot of his novels. In fact, he's considered a science fiction writer, which is interesting. He, sometimes that was a good thing, sometimes it was a bad thing. Generally, for Vonnegut, it was a bad thing because it's science fiction is not as well respected as other forms of literature, and he kind of felt that he um, was being panned by critics and discounted because he did science fiction, but the science fiction community didn't really embrace him because he didn't do science fiction in the way they did it. In fact, what's interesting about the science fiction aspect of his writing, I had a student who said one time, who liked Vonnegut and said that what is so different about Vonnegut and other science fiction writers is other science fiction writers get lazy and use science fiction as a way of fixing things. Oh, I'll just create a portal and walk through here, problem solved. You hooray, science. And Vonnegut never, gets lazy with it. And again, not all of his novels contain components of science fiction. He started with uh, his first novel, Player Piano. After he got back from the war, his brother Bernard worked for General Electric, and at the time, General Electric was today's version of sort of Google or Apple or Facebook or some really creative company that we don't think General Electric that way now, but of developing things. And they would hire these, prominent scientists, just give them lab space and, the equipment that they needed and chemicals and whatever, and let them do their own thing and then patent it and turn it into stuff. And Vonnegut's brother actually invented cloud seeding, which allows it, you put things fly over the clouds, drop silver, uh, a chemical of silver in it into the clouds, and it makes it rain. And Vonnegut's brother Bernard actually got Vonnegut the job as a PR person for General Electric in New York State, and so Vonnegut worked in PR there, and finally his short stories were selling so well that he felt that he could quit that and be a writer full time, and moved to Cape Cod, where he began writing. Now, as he says in Timequake, the invention of television came out, and so short stories weren't really in high demand. And so he was still publishing and writing short stories, and the novels were really the only thing, to way to make money at the time. And so Vonnegut, moves into these novels that don't do particularly well. His first five, weren't necessarily flops, but weren't in print. Now, Cat's Cradle is probably his second most commonly taught novel. Again, it's a great novel. And of course, Mother Night, his third novel, I think is his best novel. But it wasn't until Slaughterhouse-Five that he became a household name and had money. And it was really perfect timing. Vonnegut was enlisted in the army in World War II, like I said, when he was going out of Cornell. And he just arrived in Germany when the Battle of the Bulge. He was a scout, Army scout. He was taken as a prisoner of war during the Battle of the Bulge and was kept in a slaughterhouse in Dresden, Germany. And not a lot of people know this, but more civilians were killed in the bombing of Dresden than I think any other single incident, including Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the atomic bombs being dropped. And there was no reason to bomb Dresden. Dresden was basically didn't have a military base. There were some prisoner of war camps, and then there were no army bases. They didn't make munitions. In fact, the only real industry in the city was made basically the equivalent today of Geritol or Ensure, some sort of vitamin mixture for old people. So the United States and England's decision to bomb Dresden was strictly for morale issues, to destroy the morale of the Germans. And he saw the senselessness, even though he totally agreed with World War II, but he saw the sort of the senselessness of war there, and being an author who had survived the firebombing at Dresden, everyone knew Slaughterhouse-Five was coming before Slaughterhouse-Five ever made it into publication. In fact, he would refer to it as his famous Dresden World War II novel, even before it was published, because, again, this was this novel he was bound to write. And the timing was perfect, because this is 1969, during the Vietnam War, and people are looking for, again, the anti-war movement's a big thing, and it's not again, it exposes the atrocities of war and all that other kind of stuff. And also Vonnegut, again, incorporates this science fiction and metafiction, and we'll get to that in a second, what that means. But into this World War II novel. So it's very different than any other war novel that you may read. And so at one point it becomes the most read novel in high schools across the country, which led to censorship because it contained the word motherfucker. And schools would burn the books, and school boards would make it so the libraries couldn't carry them. And it's one of the most commonly banned books, which is a sad thing. And Vonnegut had said this because he, again, the message is to be kind to one another. That's Vonnegut's overall message of all his books, and they would be banned for these minor reasons by people who had never even read them. And of course, Vonnegut got rich because the off of the bannings, because you think, well, no, the high schools aren't buying the books, he's not making money. Yeah, they are. In fact, that's what we did not have. Slaughterhouse-Five in our library when I was in high school that I'm aware of, but Breakfast of Champions was, and I didn't know what that book was. I didn't know what Vonnegut was. In fact, I thought it was about steroids, because that is a slang, Breakfast of Champions, that was used at the time to refer to steroids. And so all I know is that one day I see every student walking around the halls reading this novel, and I go to the local bookstore, and if you special ordered books, they would put them behind the counter where you check out, and just seeing the sea of blue and asking the woman at the checkout desk what was going on. And she just said, since the school banned Breakfast of Champions from the library, we've sold more than 1,000 copies. And so again, one book being taken out of a library, and Vonnegut sold, 1,000. And, just from my high school students and surrounding schools that have heard the story. Now, the first novels went relatively unnoticed, and Slaughterhouse-Five, again, put him under the microscope of critics. And this metafiction, and let me define metafiction for you so you understand this. This is really key to understanding what Vonnegut is doing in Timequake. Metafiction is a narrative technique and genre of fiction wherein a fictional work, novel, film, play, poem, etc., self-consciously draws attention to being a work of imagination rather than a work of non-fiction, and about the process by which fiction makes the author's statements. Metafiction poses philosophic and critical questions about the relation between fiction and reality, and usually by applying irony and self-reflection. Okay, now that's just a big, complicated way of saying the writer breaks sort of that, what do they call it, the fourth wall in theater, right? You kind of address the audience, and that's where an author either breaks through in a piece of fiction and actually talks from the perspective of the author, right, about personal things, which he would do a lot with his sister, or the author breaks through and talks about the writing process, the things are endless. We see this even in television things. We'll call it, most people just call it meta, but even like the show Community, which was canceled eventually, but by the end they are making references to the actual show itself, and that's considered to be meta. Now Vonnegut did that to much success with Slaughterhouse-Five, and the critics liked it, and then he gets a little crazy with it in Breakfast of Champions and in Slapstick. In Breakfast of Champions, he really gets on his own, and in fact he at one point in the book, he is a doodler, he says, and ultimately became an artist. And I'll show some artwork and things by him in a little while. But he, drew a variety of things. And again, it goes back to that meta thing. It was almost his way of saying, here's a butthole, or, I'm going to write butthole and draw a butthole, which was just an asterisk. And I'll show you the picture of the from the book. And then actually, believe it or not, for my birthday last year, someone bought me a lapel pin of that drawing that this is on my referee hanging thing that I carry my uniform in. That's the only place I could think to put it. But, so then he writes Slapstick, and the critics just hated both of those. And even Vonnegut admitted himself they weren't his greatest works. And so in 79, he writes Jailbird, which is sort of an FU to critics. It's a very serious historical fiction related to the Watergate uh, um, scandal. And, critics didn't know what to do because it's like, holy cow, this guy can do exactly what we said he can't. And proved them wrong, and then had a string of critically acclaimed books afterwards. Now, Jailbird, Dead-Eyed Dick, and really kind of moved away from the what he had done before, and so his fans weren't particularly happy, but they were selling, critics were liking them. And in 1985 he wrote Galapagos, and what's interesting about Galapagos is Slaughterhouse-Five is what he's really known for. And during interviews, people would say, when you wrote your best novel, Slaughterhouse-Five, and Vonnegut would interrupt them and say, no, my best novel is Galapagos. And, my favorite is Mother Not, but I absolutely understand what he means by that. Followed by Bluebeard, and then Hocus Pocus. And I think Hocus Pocus is the one I taught last semester. I think when he wrote that, he thought that would be his last novel. And it is a big sort of FU to critics. It's a lot of his other novels and stuff coming together, other characters, references to his other novels. The title Hocus Pocus, and it's not the Bette Midler witch movie, is really a way of saying bullshit without saying bullshit. And so he specifically, in other novels, didn't avoid, he's never gratuitous, arguably, with the exception of maybe Timequake, in his books with obscenities. But in Hocus Pocus, he goes to great lengths to avoid using them, which makes you, as a reader, realize how ridiculous that is, how much easier it would be to say, shit hit the fan, right? Where what he really says is the feces hits the air conditioning, right? And you realize that how dumb that sounds. Now he, again, we've got the drawings, and then Timequake, I think, was just sort of he was still alive. He had a book in him, and I think it was his opportunity. Now there have been a couple of books published on Vonnegut. There's the definitive biography, and So It Goes, which is pretty much covers his life and is brilliant. It was not written until after his death. There's Unstuck in Time, which is another book which goes through his novels at the same time of what's going on in his personal life and tying those two in together. And then there's a book, The Brothers Vonnegut, which kind of talks about he and his brother's relationship and all of that. He never, and I don't know, he kind of jokingly, when he says during speeches, and I'm the smartest person I know, and I figured all of this out, he was very self-conscious about his own intellect, and was not as cocky and conceited as he may seem. And I think that's why he never really felt he needed to write his autobiography, because in my opinion, I don't think he thought that he was worthy of publishing an autobiography. And so he wrote what he called these autobiographical collages, which the first of which was Juan Peter's Foam and Grand Falloons. Then he did Palm Sunday, and he did Fate's Worse Than Death, and then finally Man Without a Country. And these were all just sort of essays about different stuff, but it never came together into a full autobiography. And I think that's what, when he wrote Timequake, and he's very clear at the beginning there, the character is telling a story. It's very meta. And so basically, Vonnegut opens up by saying, I originally wrote a book we're going to call Timequake 1. I scrapped it, and now I'm writing this book. And what he does is basically tells stories about his personal life in this autobiographical way. And then only about, I would say, 20% of the book is actually the story of Kilgore Trout and this secondary, idea about this novel and this Timequake, where the same people have to relive the same 10 years again, which again, we'll talk more about that when we actually talk about the novel itself. But I think what's interesting here is I think at times he is cursing, and again, this is I don't do trigger warnings, but your kind of warnings. I think he's using the F word and using other sexual, and rarely did he make sexual references before, but he's using those to kind of as a sort of a middle finger to critics. This is my last novel. I'm going to, do it this way. And so, and it's hard to be funny in a novel, but Vonnegut, through this metafiction, has the ability to do that. In fact, one of the things that you'll see in the novel that I think is absolutely incredible is the reference about the woman who still types his books, right? And how he should probably fire her because she still uses an old typewriter when everybody's using computers. And most students don't get that. Well, what's so funny about that? The funny thing is, if you think about it, she had to type that. And so, you should pick up on that to think how hilarious would it be that you're typing a man's, novels for him based on his um, typed up and corrected notes. And you basically have to type how you're worthless and should be fired. So that's the kind of humor Vonnegut does. Now, the other one thing I want to address, Kilgore Trout as a character is sort of Vonnegut's alter ego, or a way of sort of inserting himself into his novels, and so he can make fun of him for being this failed science fiction novel, and make fun of Vonnegut's insecurities about growing old and being poor, and all of these other things. But it also gives Vonnegut a chance, and so students will be like, wait, why is he telling this Kilgore Trout short story? Again, short stories just don't sell anymore, as well as they used to. And so, but Vonnegut has all of these short stories in him, and so Kilgore Trout is an opportunity to um, to get at those stories, and to get them out through Kilgore Trout in novels. Also, Hocus Pocus, because he didn't, he was kind of doing it as an FU to critics. It didn't really give his fans what they wanted, and so in Timequake, Vonnegut really gives his fans what he wants, which what they want, which is this metafiction, this sardonic humor, and of course, this character Kilgore Trout, who became sort of a cult figure with Vonnegut readers. And so I'm hoping that will help you understand that. Finally, Vonnegut addresses, and I thought I would show you in here. He, did art, the silk screening process that he discusses in the book when you get there. And what I'm going to do is bring up a couple of self portraits by him. There's a book was published called Drawings. After he died, his daughter wrote the introduction. Nanette, whom he references in Timequake, she wrote the introduction to the book, and I'll show you some, two self portraits, and then just two of other things, so you can kind of see what he did. Again, his merits as a uh, artist are certainly debatable, but he certainly has an interesting style, and so that gives you kind of an idea there. So again, read the novel. I completely understand that it can be a little daunting because you're not used to these novels where the author is so present in this metafiction, especially, and again, he does it more in this novel than the other novel, but give it a chance, get through it, and look for that. It's hard to be funny on the page, but there are several times I actually laughed out loud when I read this. So hopefully you'll think it's funny, and this will help you, make a little sense of it. And then later we'll get into the merits and why this novel is important enough to teach. One last thing, you may want to start reading right now, but it moves so fast. You may be kind of overwhelmed by the size of this novel, and I think it took me about 3 hours to read it. Now, again, with your reading speed, don't give yourself 3 hours and hope that you can, but power through it. And then if you like this one, there's some better Vonnegut novels I'd be more than happy to recommend based on what you liked about this novel. So, as always, if you have any questions, give me a call.
Loibner-Waitkus.